It was dawn in Athens. The market was still half asleep. The air carried the scent of olives, dust, and something else, the faint, stubborn smell of human sweat and earth. The city, proud and loud in the daylight, was still quiet enough for whispers to echo. And in the corner of the agora, beside a row of marble columns and shattered amphorae, a strange figure began to stir. His home was not a house, nor even a hut. It was a large clay barrel, cracked, weathered, stained with rain and time. Inside, the man slept curled like a stray animal, his only blanket the air itself. People had learned to ignore him. Some called him mad, others, philosopher. But when the sun touched the rim of that barrel, Athens itself seemed to pause, as if waiting for him to wake. The man yawned, stretched his limbs, and blinked toward the sunrise. His beard was tangled like unkempt roots. His hair was a wild nest of white and gray. In his eyes, however, there was no chaos, only the calm arrogance of someone who feared nothing. A young merchant passed by, carrying a basket of figs. "Still sleeping in your jar, old dog?" he sneered. The man smiled, unoffended. "At least my house travels with me," he said. "Can yours do the same?" The merchant muttered something and walked away. The man, Diogenes of Sinope, leaned against the rim of his barrel, squinting into the morning light. To him, the barrel wasn't humiliation, it was liberation. He had once known wealth, a family of merchants in the port city of Sinope. But that life had vanished like coins slipping through water. His father had been accused of corrupting the city's currency, mixing bronze into silver. Diogenes fled, humiliated, with nothing but his stubborn mind and a hunger to destroy the lies of men. He arrived in Athens with a single conviction. If society itself was counterfeit, then perhaps the only honest way to live was to reject it entirely. And so, Diogenes lived as if civilization were a joke, a grand, absurd play performed by hypocrites in fine robes. He begged, barked, mocked, and slept wherever he pleased. He ate in the streets, relieving himself in public, laughing at the stares of the civilized. To him, shame was the first chain of the soul, and he would wear no chains. The market began to wake. The sound of sandals scraped against stone, and vendors opened their stalls, calling out to customers. Diogenes watched them all, his eyes sharp and amused, the same way a dog watches humans argue over bones. He often said that men were slaves, not to masters, but to desire. They desired wealth, praise, comfort, reputation. They worked endlessly to earn things that, in the end, would enslave them even more. "Look at them," he would whisper to anyone who listened. "They build cages for themselves, then cry because the world feels small." He picked up a crust of bread that someone had dropped and began to chew, smiling as if it were a feast. Around him, the city of Socrates and Plato was buzzing with talk of virtue, democracy, and glory. Yet here sat a man who refused all of it, who believed that truth existed not in books or temples, but in the rawness of being human. At noon, a group of curious students approached him. They had heard of this mad philosopher who insulted the great and praised the poor. "Master," one said mockingly, "why do you live like a beggar when you could teach and earn your living?" Diogenes looked up at him. "Because I prefer to be rich without money," he said. "Then what is your wealth?" the student pressed. He pointed to his heart, the ability to need nothing. The students laughed, yet something in their laughter trembled, for in their eyes they saw what he meant. His freedom was terrifying. As the day grew hotter, Diogenes dragged his barrel into the shadow of a column. He dipped a hand into a clay bowl, scooped some water, and drank. Then he noticed a young boy nearby, poor, barefoot, holding a handful of water to his lips. Diogenes stared for a moment, then smashed his bowl on the ground. That boy has beaten me in simplicity, he said softly. It was not a moment of self-pity. It was joy. Every time Diogenes found someone needing less than he did, he felt as though the world had grown a little wiser. When night fell, the city shimmered under oil lamps and the drunken laughter of taverns. But in the agora, only the crickets and the philosopher remained. He lay inside his barrel, gazing at the stars through the circular opening, like looking at eternity through the eye of a needle. A passerby stopped and asked, "Are you not cold, Diogenes?" The old man smiled in the dark. "I am warmed," he said, "by the fire of my freedom." Sometimes he would speak to the moon as if it were an old friend. "Look at them, my pale sister," he would whisper. "They chase silver coins and golden crowns. You and I, we need none of it. You shine because you are, and I live because I can." His words were half madness, half poetry, and completely human. In the silence of Athens, a city proud of its logic and order, Diogenes became its living paradox. He owned nothing, yet lacked nothing. He was despised, yet untouchable. He slept in a barrel, yet dreamed as a king. He was the rebel philosopher, the man who feared nothing, because he had already lost everything that could be taken. As dawn returned, Diogenes stood up, stretched, and began walking barefoot across the market square. The stones were still cold from the night. Someone shouted at him, "Old man, why do you walk as if you own the city?" He grinned. "I do, because I need nothing from it." And the city, with all its laws and luxury, had no answer for him. Fade out, instrumental tone, slow harp, and ambient strings. In every age, there are those who obey, and those who ask why. Diogenes was not a sage of temples or scrolls. He was a mirror, and whoever looked at him saw their own slavery reflected. Long before the barrel, before the laughter and the legend, there was a boy standing on the windy shore of Sinope, watching the sea swallow his home. The waves of the Black Sea struck the harbor walls like fists, and the boy's eyes, dark and alert, followed every crest and crash as if searching for an answer in their violence. He was not yet a philosopher. He was simply a son of a man named Hypocrisy, a respected banker in a city of merchants. That city, Sinope, was proud. It traded in coins, copper, and silver, the shimmering symbols of civilization. But, like all cities built on wealth, its heart was soft and corrupt. And when rumor spread that Hesychias had been caught mixing bronze into silver, the family name fell like a broken coin into the mud. Diogenes was still young when soldiers came to seize their house. He remembered his father's hands trembling as he packed the last few things. He remembered his mother's eyes, not crying, but hollow, as if all tears had already been spent. When they left Sinope, the townspeople spat behind them. "Counterfeiters," someone shouted. "The city is purer without you." That was the moment the boy learned how fragile respect was, how quickly a man could become dirt in the eyes of those who once bowed before him. He carried that scar like a seed, and one day it would grow into rebellion. They fled to Athens, the city of ideas, democracy, and marble gods. To most exiles, it was a promise. To Diogenes, it was an open wound. He wandered its streets, watching how the poor envied the rich, and the rich feared the poor. He saw priests praying to gold-plated statues, while beggars starved on temple steps. He saw philosophers arguing about virtue, their robes clean, their stomachs full. And he began to wonder, if this was civilization, was barbarism truly worse? One evening, as the sun bled red behind the Acropolis, he sat beside his father. The old man, broken and tired, whispered, "They called me a corrupter of currency, my son, but I see now, the whole world is counterfeit." Diogenes looked at him and said quietly, "Then perhaps our task is to destroy the false coins, not of silver, but of virtue. His father laughed bitterly, a dry, painful sound. You'll end up like me if you talk like that. Diogenes smiled. No, I'll end up free. Years passed. Athens absorbed him, as it does all dreamers. He listened to the lectures of the famous, Plato, Antisthenes, and their followers. But while others took notes on metaphysics, Diogenes watched the teachers themselves. He saw how they spoke of simplicity while living in comfort. He saw how they preached virtue, yet sought the approval of the wealthy. To him, their logic was fine, but their lives were rotten. So he began to test them. Once he walked into Plato's school, dragging a dead fish. The students covered their noses in disgust. Why do you bring that stench here? Plato asked. Diogenes grinned. Because it reminds me of your words. Sweet at first, but quickly turning foul. Another day, he interrupted a lecture on the idea of man. Plato had declared, man is a featherless biped. The next morning, Diogenes burst into the hall carrying a plucked chicken and shouted, Behold, Plato's man! The students roared with laughter. Plato, pale with fury, ordered him out. But the story spread through Athens like wildfire, and at every corner of the city, people began whispering, Who is this madman who dares to mock the wise? But behind the mockery was pain, the kind of pain that only exiles understand. To be cast out once is to lose a home. To be cast out twice, from both wealth and respect, is to lose one's place among men. For Diogenes, exile became a permanent condition of the soul. He no longer belonged to any city, any class, any law. He belonged only to truth, raw, uncomfortable, and merciless. He began to sleep outdoors, eat whatever he could find, and speak to strangers as if they were mirrors. Once, when asked where he came from, he said simply, I am a citizen of the world. It was the first time in history that phrase was ever spoken. And it was not pride that made him say it. It was rejection. If the world itself had cast him out, he would claim it all as his homeland. There were nights when loneliness struck him like lightning. He would sit by the city walls, watching torches flicker across the hills, and remember the sound of the sea at Sinope, the endless crash of exile. But from that loneliness came clarity. He began to see that every human sorrow, greed, fear, vanity, lust, was just another form of need, and the only way to stop suffering was to stop needing. So he began an experiment on himself, to erase every unnecessary desire, one by one. He gave up comfort, then food variety, then possessions, then even dignity. He lived as if each thing he lost made him lighter. When asked why he punished himself, he replied, I am not punishing myself. I am training to be free. Freedom. That word became his religion. Not the freedom of citizens voting in assemblies, but the inner freedom that comes when nothing can be taken from you. He often said, the only true exile is the man who still depends on something. To him, the poor who beg for bread and the rich who beg for praise were equally enslaved. He wanted neither pity nor applause. He wanted to stand naked before life itself and not flinch. One morning, as he begged for food near the marketplace, a nobleman threw him a coin and said mockingly, You must be tired of living this way. Diogenes held up the coin and looked at it under the sun. The metal gleamed, the same kind of silver that had once destroyed his family. He threw it back at the man's feet. Keep your poison, he said. The world has enough counterfeiters already. The nobleman spat. You're just a beggar. Diogenes smiled. And you're just afraid to be one. That night, he found an empty clay jar outside a potter's workshop. He rolled it on its side, climbed in, and lay down. The moonlight entered through the circular mouth, tracing silver lines on his face. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. In exile, Diogenes had found a strange kind of belonging, not in a city, but in himself. He realized that losing everything had given him something no philosopher in Athens could buy: clarity. The next day, when a passerby asked him where he lived, he pointed to the barrel and said, "Wherever the sun reaches, there is my home." From then on, the city called him the Dog of Athens. And Diogenes, smiling, accepted the name. Because dogs, after all, are not ashamed of being honest, they bark at lies, they sleep wherever they wish, and they fear no kings. Exile had stripped him bare, but in that bareness, he discovered the essence of life itself, the courage to need nothing. For those who lose the world sometimes gain themselves. The wind in Athens had changed. By now, Diogenes was no longer the lost exile searching for meaning. He was the silent madman everyone knew by sight, but few dared to speak to. He wandered barefoot through the marble avenues, hair tangled by the dust of the streets, carrying nothing but a small cloak and a bowl that he would soon throw away. But in that chaos of wandering, something was forming, something fierce, raw, and pure. He had stopped believing in society, but not yet found a philosophy to replace it. That would change the day he met Antisthenes. Antisthenes was old by then, a disciple of Socrates, the man who had been forced to drink poison for daring to question the gods of the city. He taught on the outskirts of Athens, far from the marble schools of Plato, under a cluster of olive trees. His students were few, mostly those who had grown tired of logic and wanted something sharper, truth without comfort. When Diogenes first approached, Antisthenes was speaking to a small circle of listeners. He said, "Virtue is the only good. Everything else, wealth, fame, beauty, are distractions." Diogenes listened from a distance, motionless. For the first time, someone had spoken words that matched the shape of his own wounds. When the lesson ended, Diogenes walked forward. "I wish to learn," he said. Antisthenes looked at him, dirty, ragged, reeking of the streets, and frowned. "I do not take disciples," he replied, "especially not those who smell like the city's trash." Diogenes didn't move. He simply said, "Then strike me, if I am unworthy." Antisthenes raised his walking stick, perhaps thinking this madman would run. But Diogenes stood still. The staff came down hard, once, twice, 3 times. Blood ran from his forehead, and yet Diogenes smiled. "Strike," he said again, "for you will find no wood hard enough to turn me away." The old man stopped, astonished. There was something frightening in this stranger. Not defiance, but a kind of purity that bordered on divine madness. At last, Antisthenes sighed and lowered the stick. "If you must stay," he said, "then learn this. A philosopher's first lesson is endurance." Diogenes wiped the blood from his brow. "I was born in exile," he said. "I know nothing else." From that day on, Diogenes became his shadow. He followed Antisthenes everywhere, listening, questioning, arguing, and sometimes simply watching the older man in silence. Antisthenes taught that the purpose of life was to live in accordance with virtue and nature, not the laws of men. To be self-sufficient, autarchs. To master oneself rather than be mastered by possessions or passions. Diogenes took those teachings not as philosophy, but as commandment. If Antisthenes had built a small flame, Diogenes would turn it into a fire that burned the entire moral landscape of Greece. He stripped himself further of comfort. He slept on the ground, ate raw vegetables, begged without shame. He practiced humiliation the way soldiers practice swordsmanship. Once, when someone spat at him, he wiped it off calmly and said, "Do not be ashamed. The world spits on me daily." He trained his body to endure hunger, heat, and ridicule, not for martyrdom, but for control. He believed that pain was the first lie the body told to enslave the mind. Overcome it, he whispered to himself, and you will need nothing. There were days when Antisthenes would test him deliberately. He would give him spoiled food, or order him to stand in the sun for hours. And Diogenes accepted it all, smiling faintly. When a fellow student asked him, "Why do you suffer this cruelty?" Diogenes answered, "Because I wish to learn how not to suffer." Soon even Antisthenes began to see that the student had surpassed the master, not in knowledge, but in fearlessness. He once said, "If there is a man who can live without desire, it is this one." And when Antisthenes died, Diogenes carried no grief, only gratitude. He said, "The teacher has shown me the path. I will walk it barefoot." Thus began the life of a cynic. The word in Greek, kynikos, means dog-like. It was first used as an insult, but Diogenes wore it like a crown. To him, a dog was the most honest creature alive. It eats when it's hungry, sleeps when it's tired, barks at liars, bites at thieves, and fears nothing. Dogs do not worship gold, nor bow before kings. They live according to nature, direct, sincere, and free. Diogenes declared, "If men cannot live as men, let us live as dogs." And from that day, Athens began to whisper his name with both disgust and fascination. He roamed the city with a lantern, not at night, but in broad daylight. When people asked what he was doing, he replied, "I am looking for an honest man." Some laughed, thinking it a joke. Others grew uneasy, for they knew what he meant, that honesty had vanished, even in the city of Socrates. He mocked the priests who prayed for wealth, the scholars who debated for fame, the generals who fought for glory. He spat in the face of statues, saying, "I pray to them daily, but they never answer." When invited to a banquet of nobles, he threw bones under the table and barked, "Now we are equals." Each act was not madness, but theater. A kind of moral performance art meant to shame the powerful. He used ridicule as a weapon sharper than any sword, and the city, the mighty Athens, began to feel small before his laughter. But beneath his rebellion was something tender, a hidden ache. He believed humans could be pure again, if only they stopped pretending. He wanted people to see how much of their suffering came from chasing illusions. Once, a wealthy man asked him, "What is the secret to happiness?" Diogenes pointed to the ground. "Bury your vanity here," he said, "and water it with truth." Another time, when a philosopher boasted of his knowledge, Diogenes lifted his cloak and urinated on his book. "Behold," he said, "the difference between wisdom and waste." The man screamed in outrage. Diogenes laughed. "If it offends you, perhaps your learning is only skin deep." He became both pariah and prophet, despised in the agora, adored in whispers. The youth followed him secretly, curious about the madman who feared nothing. Even kings would one day seek his counsel, only to be met with indifference. But in these early years, the fire of cynicism was still young, burning wild, uncontrolled, devouring everything false in its path. He would spend nights talking to himself, rehearsing arguments against the world. "Men build temples to gods they don't believe in," he muttered. "They buy food not for hunger, but for pride. They marry not for love, but for fear of loneliness. If this is wisdom, then I choose folly." He lay back on the cold ground, eyes fixed on the stars. "Nature made us simple," he whispered. "It is civilization that made us miserable." And under that vast sky, Diogenes of Sinope, the exile, the beggar, the madman, was reborn as something else entirely. The first man to live free in a world enslaved by desire. From the ruins of exile, he built a new kingdom, one without walls, gold, or laws. He would live as a dog, but think as a god. And through that paradox, the first true cynic was born. Athens, the city of marble, wisdom, and words, had never seen a war like this one. It was not fought with swords or shields, but with laughter, mockery, and silence. And its lone warrior was a man who owned nothing but his voice. They called him the mad dog of the agora, but Diogenes had begun to think of himself differently, not as mad, but as awake. He saw the world sleepwalking through illusions, worshipping things that would one day rot. And so, he made it his life's mission to wake them, even if he had to bite. Each morning, the city came alive with the same rhythms, merchants shouting prices, philosophers preaching virtue, soldiers boasting of victories, priests blessing statues of stone. To Diogenes, it was all theater. He would walk among them with his lantern, his cloak barely covering his thin frame, stopping at faces and studying them like one might study broken pottery. "What are you looking for, old man?" People would laugh. He would raise the lantern higher and say, "I am searching for a human being." They laughed harder, thinking it a joke. But the joke, as always, was on them. One day, he stood before the grand steps of the Temple of Apollo. Inside, priests sang hymns for offerings, their golden cups glinting under sacred fire. Diogenes stood outside, staring at them. Then he spat on the marble floor. The guards rushed to seize him. "Why do you insult the gods?" one demanded. "I do not insult the gods," Diogenes replied calmly. "I insult those who sell them." They beat him, of course, but when they left, he smiled through blood and dust. For in every blow, he felt proof that his enemies were weak. He began to haunt the rich districts of Athens, the markets of perfume, silk, and jewelry. He would sit at their entrances and eat scraps from the ground. When women in embroidered robes passed by, covering their noses, he would call out, "You hide your face from my smell, yet sleep with men who stink of greed." Some would cry out for guards. Others would pretend not to hear. But a few would stop, just for a heartbeat, and feel the truth sting beneath his words. He was not fighting men, really. He was fighting the lies they lived inside. In the evenings, he returned to his barrel by the marketplace. Children followed him, throwing pebbles, barking to mock him. He barked back, grinning. "At least your play is honest. You're better men than your fathers." He taught by inversion. If the world praised humility, he exaggerated pride. If they worshipped wealth, he performed poverty. Every act was a mirror turned upside down, reflecting the absurdity of convention. When asked why he chose such a miserable life, he said, "I am not miserable. I only refuse to decorate my chains." There is a story, perhaps legend, perhaps truth, of a great festival in Athens where nobles feasted on roasted lamb, dancers performed, and philosophers delivered speeches to please their patrons. Diogenes arrived naked, carrying nothing but a wooden spoon. He climbed onto the table of the richest host, dipped his spoon into the stew, and began to eat. The guests screamed in outrage. "What are you doing?" the host demanded. "Proving that your feast was not made for gods," Diogenes said, "only for mouths." When they dragged him out, he laughed all the way to the door. Athens had its philosophers, but only he had turned philosophy into a living joke. Yet, beneath that laughter, there was pain. He saw clearly that the very people he mocked were not evil, merely blind. They were prisoners who had built their own cages, polishing the bars each morning, calling it progress. He felt pity for them, even as he insulted them. One night, as he sat by the fire outside the city, a beggar came to share warmth. The man said, "You and I are the same, both poor, both despised." Diogenes shook his head. "No, friend, you beg for bread. I beg for wisdom." As his fame, or infamy onward spread, more and more people came to test him. A rich youth once offered him a gold cup, saying, "Take this, Diogenes. Even a dog needs a bowl. He took the cup, studied it for a moment, then threw it on the ground. "You are right," he said, "but I am not the dog that drinks from golden bowls." The boy blushed, humiliated, and Diogenes smiled gently. "Do not be ashamed," he added. "Be grateful. You met one man who cannot be bought." He often walked through the crowded markets at noon, staring at merchants arranging their goods. He would mutter to himself, "So many things, and not one that I need." To him, the marketplace was not commerce. It was confession. Every object for sale revealed a weakness: the hunger to impress, the fear of being forgotten. He once saw a man polishing a bronze statue of Hermes until it gleamed. Diogenes walked up, spat on it, and said, "Now it shines for the first time." When the man shouted in anger, Diogenes shrugged. "You polish metal, but not your mind." His greatest enemies were not the rich, nor the priests, nor the scholars. They were the hypocrites, those who wore virtue as decoration. He despised them more than tyrants. At least tyrants admitted what they were. He said, "The liar who calls himself good is worse than a thief. A thief steals bread, a liar steals truth." In the plaza, he shouted sermons that sounded like madness, but burned with clarity. You speak of justice, yet own slaves. You pray for peace, yet arm your sons. You praise courage, yet fear hunger. You have traded your souls for comfort, and still call yourselves free. Some threw stones at him, others applauded, but all remembered his words, and yet, even the cynic could grow tired. Some nights he lay in his barrel, watching the stars shimmer like tiny fires above the rooftops. He wondered if truth was a curse, if to see clearly was to suffer endlessly. But then he remembered the sea at Sinope, and his father's fall, and how exile had stripped him bare. He smiled into the darkness. "No," he whispered, "the curse is blindness. To see is to be free." At dawn, he rose again, ready for another day of war, the only war that mattered, the war against hypocrisy. He would win not by killing enemies, but by revealing them. And as he stepped barefoot into the market, someone jeered, "Why do you live like a dog?" Diogenes turned, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Because dogs don't pretend to be gods," he said, "and men do." He walked on, his laughter echoing against the marble walls, a sound that Athens would never forget. He fought not for power, but for truth. And though the world mocked him, it was the world, not he, that was ridiculous. For hypocrisy cannot survive the laughter of one free man. It stood in the corner of the agora, half broken, half forgotten, a large clay barrel that once stored grain or oil. Now it held a man. Athens had seen kings and conquerors, poets and prophets, but never had it seen a philosopher who chose a barrel for a home. Children laughed when they passed by. Merchants spat beside it. And yet, when the sun rose each morning, the light seemed to linger there, as if even the gods paused to see the man who dared to own nothing. His name was Diogenes. His home, a barrel. His philosophy, freedom. He had lived there long enough that the people stopped asking why. But to Diogenes, every day inside that clay womb was a declaration of war against the world. The barrel was not poverty. It was rejection, of false comfort, of ownership, of dependence. He had seen how possessions possessed men, how the fear of losing turned freedom into slavery. In the silence of his barrel, he whispered to himself, "If you need nothing, no one can take anything from you." That was the heart of his creed. He had few belongings, a cloak, a walking stick, a small bowl, until the day he saw a boy drink water from his hands. Diogenes smashed the bowl and laughed. "Even this I can live without." It became his ritual. Each time he discovered something unnecessary, he abandoned it. Each time he abandoned, he grew lighter. Until, one day, there was nothing left to lose. The world pitied him, but he pitied the world. He once said, "I laugh at those who spend their lives gathering gold, for I am richer. I have no need for guards." At noon, the marketplace buzzed around him. Philosophers debated beneath marble porticos, their voices polished with logic. Merchants argued over prices. Priests blessed idols for coin. Lovers whispered promises under statues of Aphrodite. And in the midst of it all sat Diogenes, bare, calm, unmoved. The sun baked the clay of his barrel, and yet he smiled, letting its warmth sink into his skin. Someone shouted, "You live like an animal!" Diogenes replied, "Then what does that make you? A god or a liar?" The crowd roared with laughter, but beneath it was unease. He had turned the marketplace, the heart of civilization, into a mirror. Visitors came from other cities just to see him. Some brought gifts, hoping for blessings or wisdom. He refused them all. A nobleman once arrived with a servant carrying food and wine. "Take this," he said kindly. "You must be hungry." Diogenes looked up from his barrel. "Do you eat to live, or live to eat?" The man hesitated. "I suppose both." "Then take it back," Diogenes said. "You've already eaten enough for 2 lives." At night, when the city grew quiet, the philosopher spoke to the stars. He saw them as his true teachers, eternal, indifferent, pure. They neither owned nor desired, yet shone without effort. He envied their silence. Sometimes, lying inside the barrel, he would murmur, "Men build palaces to sleep restlessly. I sleep in clay and dream freely." The barrel was his monastery, his fortress, his mirror. It sheltered him not from rain, but from illusion. Once a scholar visited him and asked, "What do you gain from living like this?" Diogenes gestured to the open sky. "Everything that cannot be stolen." "But surely," the scholar said, "comfort, love, and respect, those matter too?" Diogenes laughed softly. "Comfort numbs, love binds, and respect corrupts. I want none of them." He pointed to his heart. "The man who seeks applause is a slave to every fool who can withhold it." His philosophy spread quietly through whispers, like wind moving through reeds. The young admired him, the old feared him. He was too poor to envy, too fearless to control, too honest to hate for long. He never wrote a single book. His life was the text, his body, the proof, and his barrel, the library. Each visitor who mocked him became a page in that book. Each act of scorn became a footnote in his gospel of freedom. One morning, a group of philosophers stopped by, led by a proud orator who said, "Diogenes, if you are so wise, tell us, what is the good life?" Diogenes stood, brushing dust from his cloak. "To live without needing lies," he said. "And what is truth then?" the man pressed. He pointed to the ground. "Truth is what remains when nothing else can be taken away." The crowd murmured. Some laughed, but the older philosophers fell silent. For deep down, they knew he was not speaking theory. He was living it. He was seen walking barefoot through snow in winter, unflinching. When asked how he endured it, he replied, "I warm myself with contempt for comfort." He would sit among beggars not out of pity, but kinship. "Only the hungry know the taste of life," he told them. "Only those who have nothing understand the meaning of having." Once, a soldier mocked him. "If everyone lived like you, Athens would collapse." Diogenes smiled. "If everyone lived like me, Athens would never need to be built." But the barrel was not merely a rejection. It was a symbol of rebirth, a womb where a man could strip away everything false and emerge new. Inside its hollow echo, Diogenes found the silence of the world, a silence untouched by prayer, politics, or pride. he said once. To live simply is to live close to the gods, for they need nothing, and neither do I. That line spread across Athens like wildfire, carried by mouths both mocking and awed. And though he never sought disciples, a few began to follow him, quietly from a distance. They called him the Philosopher in the Barrel. To him, that was the highest title imaginable. One afternoon, a young man sat beside his barrel, trembling. He was rich, educated, respected, and miserable. "Master," he said, "I have everything, yet I feel empty. Why?" Diogenes looked at him for a long time, then pointed to the barrel. "Step in," he said. The youth frowned. "Why?" "To see what remains when everything else is gone." The man hesitated, then left. Diogenes smiled sadly. He wants freedom, but fears the price. He understood then why most men could never be free. They preferred the comfort of chains to the terror of emptiness. Freedom, he realized, is not for everyone, only for those who can love the silence of their own soul. And that silence was all he had. It was enough. As the years passed, the barrel grew older, the clay cracked by seasons of rain and sun. But Diogenes remained unchanged, gaunt, fierce, alive. He would sit at its edge, feeding crumbs to stray dogs, speaking softly to them as if to brothers. "You and I," he said once to a mongrel curled beside him, "we have found the same truth. They call you beast because you live by nature. They call me beast because I do the same." The dog wagged its tail. Diogenes laughed. "You see? Only the honest understand me." In the end, the barrel became more than a home. It was a mirror for humanity, a challenge, a sermon, a question left hanging in the air. How much of your life is truly yours? Because to live in a barrel was not to live without, it was to live beyond possessions, beyond fear, beyond the endless hunger to be more than what you are. He lived in what others called emptiness, but in that emptiness, he found the fullness of being. While the world built walls, he built space. While others prayed for wealth, he prayed for less. And so, the man in the barrel became the freest soul under the sun. The sun had risen sharp and white over Corinth. The city glimmered like a crown of marble and dust, a place where generals, poets, and merchants gathered to praise themselves. And, on this particular morning, its streets buzzed with a rumor that ran faster than the wind itself. Alexander the Great had arrived. He was 20 years old, already the conqueror of nations, the son of Philip of Macedon, and the student of Aristotle. Men called him the new Achilles, destined to rule the world. Every philosopher, every scholar, every merchant wanted a glimpse of him, a touch of his shadow, a chance to speak to the boy who would become a god. But Alexander, restless as the flame of his ambition, sought someone else. Not another king, not a prophet. A man, or what was left of one. He had heard of a philosopher who lived in a barrel, who mocked the world, who feared nothing. And for a reason he couldn't quite explain, he wanted to see him. They found Diogenes lying half naked in the sun, his head resting against the rim of his barrel, his face turned toward the sky. He was thin, brown from the heat, his beard tangled, his eyes half closed in perfect contentment. Around him, dogs slept. Beside him, the world's greatest conqueror dismounted his horse. A hush fell over the market. No one had ever seen Alexander stand before a beggar. The young king approached slowly, the metal of his armor catching the sunlight. Even in stillness, he radiated command, every gesture carrying the weight of an empire. "Are you Diogenes of Sinope?" he asked. The old man barely turned his head. "I am," he said lazily. "And you are blocking my sun." A murmur spread through the crowd. Guards stiffened, hands on their swords. But Alexander, instead of anger, began to smile. He stepped aside and said, Ask me for anything you desire, and I shall grant it." Diogenes sat up slowly, blinked at the blinding light, and replied, "Then stand out of my sunlight." For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop. The conqueror of Asia, silenced by a man with nothing. Alexander stared at him. This ragged creature whose only throne was a barrel, whose kingdom was a circle of light on the ground. And then, to everyone's astonishment, Alexander laughed. A deep, honest, uncontrollable laugh. He turned to his generals and said, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." Diogenes smiled faintly. "If I were not Diogenes," he said, "I would still wish to be Diogenes." The crowd gasped. The young king, raised to believe he was the son of Zeus, stood before a man who needed nothing, and, for the first time, he felt small. They spoke for a while, sir, though no one knows exactly what was said. Some say Alexander asked him, "Are you not afraid of me?" Diogenes replied, "Why should I be? You can take nothing from me." Others claim the king said, "Do you not realize who stands before you?" To which Diogenes answered, "A shadow passing before the sun." When Alexander left, his entourage followed in reverent silence. But the young king's face had changed. For all his armies, he had just met a man more powerful than himself, a man unconquerable, because he had already conquered the only enemy that mattered, desire. That night, Diogenes returned to his barrel. The crowd had long dispersed, and only the cicadas sang. He looked at his hands, rough and dirty, and smiled. "A king came to me," he muttered to the moon, "and left poorer." He pulled his cloak around his shoulders, lay back into the curve of the barrel, and stared at the stars. "They chase the world," he whispered, "and I chase the sun." He fell asleep smiling, his laughter echoing faintly in the night air. Meanwhile, in his grand tent on the outskirts of the city, Alexander lay awake. The scent of incense filled the air, but it could not calm him. His mind replayed the image of ragged man basking in sunlight, utterly unafraid. He turned to his advisor and asked, "Tell me, do you think that man is truly happy?" The advisor hesitated. "He seems content, my lord, but he has nothing." Alexander closed his eyes. Perhaps that is why. Years later, when Alexander's empire stretched from Greece to India, he would still remember that meeting. In his darkest moments, surrounded by jewels, gold, and blood, he would think of the barrel and the man who owned the sun. Some said that as he lay dying in Babylon, Alexander whispered, "Bury me with my hands open, so the world will see that even a king leaves empty." No one knows if that was true. But if it was, perhaps it was Diogenes who had taught him that lesson. Back in Greece, Diogenes continued his life unchanged. He spoke of the encounter only once, when a student asked if he was honored by Alexander's visit. He replied, "The sun visits me every day. Why should a man impress me?" To him, kings and beggars were the same, both trapped in the illusion of need. The only difference was the size of their cage. He told his students, "Do not envy power, for the man who commands 1,000 soldiers is still a slave, to glory, to fear, to the whispers of history. The only free man is he who commands himself." And when someone asked him how it felt to be praised by the most powerful man alive, Diogenes answered, "It feels like being barked at by a very polite dog." The story spread across the Greek world, retold in ports, markets, temples. To some, Diogenes became a saint of reason. To others, a fool. But to those who truly listened, he was something rarer. A reminder that freedom does not come from ruling the world, but from ceasing to be ruled by it. In time, the meeting became myth. Artists painted it. Poets recited it. But none captured its true weight, the quiet collision of two eternities, one clothed in gold, the other in dust. When historians wrote of Alexander's conquests, they counted cities, empires, kingdoms. But Diogenes conquered something greater, the fear of needing anything at all. As the years wore on, the barrel philosopher aged, his skin darkened under countless summers, his beard silvered by countless winters. But his eyes remained the same, bright, mocking, alive. Whenever someone mentioned Alexander, he would chuckle softly. He wanted to rule the world, he'd say, and I wanted only sunlight. We both got what we desired. One ruled nations, one ruled himself. One died surrounded by gold, the other by silence. Yet history remembers their meeting, not for conquest, but for contrast. Because in that moment, beneath the Greek sun, power bowed to freedom. The story of the meeting spread like wildfire. Across Greece, men whispered the tale of the philosopher who told the king to move aside. Some laughed, some were scandalized. But those who had seen it, those who had stood in that blinding sun, spoke of something deeper. They said the air around Diogenes did not bend before power. They said he was the only man in Greece who did not bow. And perhaps that was true. For in a world built on obedience, one man's indifference is more terrifying than rebellion. After Alexander left Corinth, Diogenes returned to Athens, dragging his barrel back through the gates as if nothing had happened. To the city, he was again a beggar. To himself, he was exactly as before. And that was the point. He had spoken to a king and felt nothing. He had been offered the world and yawned. That night, as the city slept, he sat beside his barrel under the moon. The dogs stirred beside him. He whispered, half to them, half to himself. They fear him because he commands armies. I do not fear him, because I command myself. Power. That was the thing Diogenes had spent his life studying. Not the crowns or the gold or the banners fluttering in the wind, but the invisible chain that linked every man to his own fear. He saw it everywhere, in the trembling voice of the merchant before a tax collector, in the scholar who softened his truth to please his patrons, in the soldier who bowed to his general even when his heart screamed no. They are all slaves, he said, though none wear chains. And then, in the tone of a teacher giving a lesson to ghosts, he added, the greatest tyrant is the fear of losing wealth, losing respect, losing life. When people mocked him, he laughed. When they cursed him, he blessed them. When they spat, he turned his face. To many, this was madness. To Diogenes, it was training. The world, he said, is a constant storm. You can curse the rain, or you can learn to walk naked. And he had walked naked through ridicule, through hunger, through loneliness, until nothing left in the world could touch him. One afternoon, a young student came to him trembling. Master, he said, I want to live without fear as you do. How do I begin? Diogenes looked at him for a long time. Begin by losing something, he said. The boy frowned. Lose what? Anything you think you cannot live without. The boy left in silence, and Diogenes smiled faintly. He knew most would never return. Few could endure the medicine of truth. He believed fear began with possession. The moment you own something, it begins to own you. Gold, reputation, even love. All of them built cages. And so, to be fearless, you had to be empty. The lion does not fear thieves, he said once, because he carries nothing worth stealing. It became his prayer, if such a man could pray. Strip me bare until only truth remains. One winter morning, soldiers of Athens came to the marketplace. A crowd had gathered. They were seizing beggars, clearing the streets for a festival in honor of some god who had never walked among them. A guard approached Diogenes. Old man, he barked, move your barrel. This place is for the procession of the divine. Diogenes looked up at the soldier's armor, gleaming like the sun, and smiled. "Tell your god," he said, "that the divine already lives here." The soldier's hand went to his sword. The crowd gasped, but Diogenes simply yawned. "If you kill me," he said, "you will only prove that I am free and you are not." The soldier froze, not from pity, but confusion. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He turned away, and Diogenes went back to sleep. That night, someone asked him, "Were you not afraid he would strike you down?" He replied, "Would you be afraid to break a shadow? Fear is for those who believe the body is the self." He looked at his own hands, bony, weathered, trembling slightly with age. "This," he said, "is not me. This is only the shell I borrow until the light fades." The student beside him whispered, "Then what are you?" Diogenes smiled. "The part that cannot be frightened." He had seen too many men become slaves to their fear of death. Priests used it to control the faithful. Generals used it to command obedience. Kings used it to buy loyalty. But Diogenes had walked so close to death, so close to hunger and humiliation, that it had lost its teeth. "Death," he said once, "it is simply the moment when life exhales." He even joked about it. When someone asked where he wished to be buried, he answered, "Throw me to the dogs. They are more loyal than men." "But they will eat you," someone cried. Diogenes shrugged. "Then at least my body will finally serve a purpose." The crowd laughed uneasily, because they knew he meant it. His laughter became his armor. Whenever someone tried to shame him, he turned it into a lesson. A senator once sneered, "Old man, you are a disgrace to philosophy." Diogenes replied, "Then philosophy should thank me for lowering her standards." A rich man mocked his poverty. Diogenes grinned. "Strange. The more you have, the less I envy you." And when someone called him a madman, he answered, "Madness is the last refuge of those who cannot be bought." He was fearless because he had nothing to lose and nothing to prove. That was his secret. The paradox that terrified both the powerful and the weak. Power, he realized, depends on permission. A tyrant is only powerful as long as someone obeys. A critic is only dangerous as long as someone listens. A master only exists as long as someone kneels. But what happens when a man refuses to kneel? The entire illusion collapses. Diogenes became that collapse. He once said, "If you wish to be free, learn to desire less than the world can take from you." And then, almost as a whisper to himself, "When you no longer fear losing, the gods themselves envy your peace." In the twilight of his life, he sat one evening by the harbor, watching the sails drift into the horizon. The sky was deep orange, the water burning with light. A sailor nearby asked, "Old man, are you not afraid of the sea?" Diogenes smiled. The sea fears those who do not cling to land. He closed his eyes and breathed in the salt air. Every inhale, a reminder that he still lived. Every exhale, a rehearsal for the final one. He no longer believed in destiny, or heaven, or the mercy of gods. He believed only in one truth, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear decide. And so, when the world called him a beggar, a dog, a fool, he bowed. "Yes," he said, "for the wise are too afraid to be any of these." They say Alexander conquered the world, but Diogenes conquered the thing that makes men slaves, fear. And in that victory, greater than any empire, he found the only peace that lasts, the calm of a soul that has nothing left to defend. They called him a dog. It was meant as an insult, a word thrown like a stone. But Diogenes caught it, examined it, and decided to keep it. "Yes," he said, smiling, "I am a dog, but not your kind. I bite only those who lie." In the heart of Athens, among marble statues and golden temples, a man lived like a stray. He slept wherever he pleased, ate what he found, barked at the powerful, and wagged his tongue at truth. Children would point at him and laugh. "Look, the old dog philosopher." And Diogenes would bow. "Ah, my reputation precedes me." For him, dog was not degradation, it was a revelation. He saw in dogs the honesty humans had lost. They ate when hungry, slept when tired, and loved without reason. They asked for nothing but what life freely gave. They were shameless, not because they were crude, but because they were innocent. "Dogs do not blush," he said. "They have nothing to hide." Humans, on the other hand, were masters of disguise, dressing pride as virtue, lust as love, greed as ambition. They barked only when the crowd barked, and they wagged their tails at kings who fed them lies. "If I am a dog," Diogenes said, "then I am the last honest citizen of Athens." He began to live the metaphor. He begged like a dog, ate like a dog, slept like a dog, without shame. When mocked, he would lift his leg as if to mark the city as his territory. When philosophers debated the nature of courage, he would interrupt, "Here it is," pointing to himself. Once at a banquet, he saw the guests indulging in roasted meats, fine wines, perfumes. He climbed onto the table, sniffed at the plates, and said, "I too am looking for food fit for men, not gods." When they shouted at him to leave, he barked twice and replied, "Be patient. Even dogs clean the scraps of civilization." But his shamelessness was not vulgarity. It was a weapon, a way to strip illusion bare. He used shock the way a surgeon uses a knife, to cut away rot. He believed that the body was not sinful, only misunderstood. "If the gods gave us nature," he said, "why are we ashamed of it?" When others whispered that his behavior was obscene, he answered, "Obscene is pretending to be pure while drowning in desire." He wandered the streets with no destination, his presence both absurd and sacred. When priests prayed, he yawned. When generals marched, he applauded mockingly. When orators spoke of justice, he lay down and slept. "Wake me," he said, "when your words feed the hungry." His very existence became a mirror, one that reflected not beauty, but truth. And Athens, for all its glory, could not bear the sight of itself. People asked him, "Why do you humiliate yourself so?" He answered, "Because I want to prove that humiliation does not exist, only pride." They asked, "Why live like an animal?" "Because animals are not ashamed to be what they are," he said. They asked, "Then what is man?" He smiled, "The only animal ashamed of itself." He taught that nature, not society, was the true teacher. Everything beyond nature was vanity. "Houses teach us greed," he said. "Temples teach us lies. Clothes teach us shame, and politics teaches us fear." He tore off each layer of civilization one by one, until only the raw, untamed self remained. The part that could stand naked before the universe, without trembling. One afternoon, a young noble stopped by his barrel. He watched Diogenes eat lentils with his hands and said, "If you learned to flatter kings, you would not have to live like this." Diogenes smiled, "And if you learned to live like this, you would not have to flatter kings." He saw human hypocrisy as disease, a sickness born of wanting to appear better than one truly was. He prescribed a bitter cure, truth without shame, to speak as one thought, to live as one believed, to want nothing beyond necessity. He called it an idea, the art of shameless honesty. To him, shame was the rust on the soul. It kept people from living freely, loving openly, and speaking truthfully. When someone accused him of corrupting youth, he laughed. "I do not corrupt them. I unmask them. They come to me pretending to be men. I show them they are still slaves." He taught that self-control was not repression, but alignment with nature. To fight desire is foolish, he said. To understand it is wisdom. He compared passion to a barking dog, loud, impatient, but easily calmed when acknowledged. He believed dogs were the perfect philosophers. They lived in the present. They recognized friends and enemies without deceit. They guarded what they loved and left what they did not need. Dogs have no temples, he said, and yet they know loyalty better than priests. He once fed scraps to a stray and said to a crowd, "This one has never lied, never coveted gold, never flattered a tyrant. Which of you dares to say the same?" Silence answered him. But not all who mocked him were enemies. Some began to understand, slowly, painfully, what he was teaching. That freedom is not rebellion against society, but reconciliation with nature. A student asked, "Master, what does it mean to live like a dog?" Diogenes replied, "To be honest when others lie, to be loyal when others betray, to sleep when tired, to eat when hungry, and to bite only when truth is attacked." He was often seen at the gates of Athens, watching travelers come and go. One day, a merchant passed by and said, "Diogenes, the dogs of the city bark too loudly. They disturb the peace." Diogenes grinned. "They bark because they smell corruption. When men stop stinking, dogs will stop barking." At night, he sat among stray dogs near his barrel. The city lights shimmered above like a false sky. He scratched one behind the ear and said softly, "They throw us bones, my friend, because they fear what we remind them of, that they too were born naked, hungry, and honest." He looked into the dog's eyes, clear, loyal, untroubled, and whispered, "Perhaps you are the better philosopher." The animal wagged its tail as if agreeing. Diogenes laughed. "At least you never pretended to be wise." He began to refer to himself openly as the Dog of Athens. And though they mocked him, the title stuck. He became both ridicule and legend. The people who threw stones at him by day told stories about him by night. Some feared him. Others secretly envied his peace. Because deep down, they knew he had found something the temples could not sell. A truth too simple for the proud to accept. That freedom begins when shame ends. As he grew older, Diogenes no longer fought the city. See, he simply lived. His silence became its own sermon. He needed no followers, no disciples, no schools. One night, a poet asked, "Old man, what legacy will you leave the world?" Diogenes smiled at the stars. "I leave them a mirror," he said. "When they look into it, they will bark." They called him a dog to wound him, but he turned the insult into a crown. For in a world of masks, the dog was the only creature still honest, the only one who lived without shame, loved without lies, and feared nothing. The Agora of Athens, heart of the city, pulse of civilization. A place where every desire had a price, and every virtue could be bought with the right coin. On bright mornings, the market sang with voices, merchants shouting, animals bleating, sandals scraping against stone. Perfume drifted through the air, mingled with the smell of sweat and ambition. It was here that Athens sold not only goods, but dreams. And into this chaos walked Diogenes, barefoot, unbent, and carrying a lantern. It was broad daylight. The sun blazed overhead, yet the old man's lamp flickered as he held it high above the crowd. Children laughed first. "Look, the mad philosopher brings fire to the sun." Diogenes smiled, undisturbed. "Yes," he said, "because the light of reason shines dimmer than this flame." He wove through the crowd, stopping before stalls, peering into faces, squinting, studying, shaking his head. "What are you doing, old man?" a merchant finally asked. "I am looking," Diogenes said, "for a human being." Laughter rippled through the market like a breeze through dust. "Then you are lost?" someone shouted. Diogenes nodded. Yes, we all are. He approached a table of jewelers polishing silver. The coins gleamed in their hands, tiny suns spinning between fingers. He held up his lantern and asked, "Do you sell honesty here, or only things that glitter like it?" The jeweler frowned. "I sell what people want." Diogenes sighed. "And I seek what people fear." He moved on. At another stall, a philosopher lectured to a crowd about justice. His robe was white, his beard carefully trimmed, his tone confident and hollow. Diogenes raised his lamp toward him. "Tell me, friend," he called, "can your justice feed the hungry?" The philosopher hesitated. "No, but it enlightens the mind." Diogenes smiled sadly. "Then you are a man who sells mirrors to the blind." The audience murmured, half laughter, half shame. Further down the street, a priest sprinkled water on a statue, muttering prayers for prosperity. "Do you think the gods listen?" Diogenes asked. "Of course," the priest said indignantly. "Then why must you keep repeating yourself?" The priest's lips trembled. Diogenes shrugged. "If your God needs reminders, he is no God. If he doesn't, then your prayers are noise." He turned next to a young couple holding hands. Their eyes were soft, their smiles tender, the sweetness of first love. Diogenes lifted his lantern between them and said gently, "Be kind to each other, for soon you will both pretend." The girl pulled away, insulted. The boy glared. "Old man, why must you poison happiness?" Diogenes looked at the flame. "I do not poison it," he said. "I only reveal its expiration date." By noon, the market was buzzing with mockery. People followed him, jeering, taunting, throwing scraps of fruit. But he kept walking, eyes half closed, lips half smiling. "Where is this man you seek?" someone shouted. Diogenes raised the lamp high and said, "Perhaps he's fled to the mountains? For here, all I find are rolls, buyers, sellers, priests, lovers, but not a single soul who is simply alive." He stopped before a stall where masks were sold for the theater, faces of kings, gods, heroes. He picked one up, turned it toward the light, and whispered, "Ah, this one is honest. It admits it is false." He placed a coin on the table, the only coin he ever kept. The merchant stared, bewildered. Diogenes smiled. "For once I pay willingly. It's refreshing to meet truth, even if it's carved from clay." In the afternoon heat, he sat beneath a column and watched the crowd move like a river of wants. Men shouting over prices, women bargaining over dyes, slaves carrying loads heavier than hope. He murmured, "Here, everything has a master, even freedom." A boy approached, curious. "Old man, why do you carry that light in the day?" Diogenes smiled kindly. "So that when I finally find a man, I will see him clearly." The boy frowned. "And if you never find one?" "Then at least I will have kept the lamp lit." He believed that civilization, for all its brilliance, had driven humanity insane. Men worshipped what they owned, obeyed what they feared, and destroyed what they could not control. "The market," he said, "is the temple of madness, and its god is desire." He saw Athens not as a city of thinkers, but of buyers and sellers of virtue. Even truth had become a commodity, bartered, trimmed, and decorated for applause. "Every man here," he whispered to the flame, "is both merchant and merchandise." When evening came, the market began to empty. The torches burned low, the laughter faded, and the marble shone faintly under the moon. Still, Diogenes walked, lamp flickering, eyes scanning faces. A drunk stumbled toward him. "Have you found your man yet?" Diogenes looked at him. Eyes blurred, voice slurred, but laughter still human. He shook his head. "Not yet, but you at least are honest about your madness." As he passed the last stall, a merchant asked mockingly, "What will you do when your lamp burns out?" Diogenes stopped. Then, he said, I will walk in darkness like everyone else, but at least I will know it. The merchant fell silent, and for a brief moment, the noise of the market seemed to fade into something like thought. Later that night, he returned to his barrel. The lamp was nearly spent, the oil low. He set it beside him, the flame trembling in the breeze. A student who had followed him all day asked, Master, did you truly expect to find an honest man? Diogenes looked up at the stars. I hoped, he said softly, but hope is another madness. Better to search without believing than to believe without searching. The student frowned. Then why keep the lamp lit? Diogenes smiled, because even false light reminds men that they live in shadow. He lay down inside his barrel, the last glow of the lamp dancing on the clay walls. Outside, the city still murmured, deals, prayers, desires. He whispered to the darkness, I found merchants, lovers, priests, philosophers, but not one human being who was content simply to be. The lamp sputtered, hissed, and went out. Diogenes closed his eyes and laughed quietly to himself. Perhaps the man I seek never existed. Perhaps he was the one who held the lantern. They called him mad for searching in daylight, but he saw clearer than most who walked by night. In the market of madness, he carried the last small flame of sanity, and, when it went out, Athens slept again. The morning was warm and windless. The air carried the scent of olives and dust. In the marketplace, merchants shouted, philosophers argued, and the dogs, Diogenes' only companions, dozed in patches of sunlight. The old man had been walking since dawn, barefoot, thin, carrying a small bowl, his only remaining possession. He stopped near a fountain where the children of Athens gathered to play. Their laughter echoed against the marble columns like bells of innocence, a sound Diogenes rarely heard in the city of grown men. He sat by the edge, dipped his bowl into the clear water, and drank slowly. For a brief moment, peace, the simple, unspoken joy of being alive. Then he saw a boy. The child was poor, his tunic torn, his sandals worn to threads. He knelt by the fountain, cupped his hands together, and lifted water to his lips. The sun caught the droplets as they fell, silver in the air. Diogenes froze. The boy smiled at him shyly, unaware that he had just shattered the philosopher's world. The old man looked at his bowl, the one thing he thought he truly needed, and then at the child's hands. 2 perfect cups, shaped by nature. He laughed, a laugh so pure it startled the birds on the fountain's edge. He stood, lifted the bowl high, and smashed it against the stones. The sound cracked through the square like thunder. The boy flinched. Diogenes bowed slightly and said, Thank you, child. You have taught me that even this was too much. People nearby stared, whispering, Has he lost what little sense he had left? But Diogenes only smiled, letting the sunlight wash over his face. He felt lighter, absurdly, beautifully lighter, as if by breaking that clay bowl, he had broken the last invisible chain of possession. He muttered to himself, Every object we cling to is a confession of fear. He looked at his empty hands. Now I have nothing left to lose. For days afterward, he spoke often of the boy. Not by name. The child was no disciple, no symbol. He was simply a moment, a mirror that showed Diogenes how deeply habit hides inside us. To live simply, he told those who mocked him, is not to have little. It is to need little. He turned the lesson into a ritual. Each time he found himself clinging to a habit, a place, a word, a routine, he tried to lose it. He ate with his fingers. He drank from streams. He slept wherever his body felt tired. He wanted to erase the distance between man and nature, to become, as he said, a leaf carried by the wind, not the hand trying to grasp it. One evening, as he lay by his barrel, a student approached and asked, Master, "Why do you destroy everything that gives comfort?" Diogenes answered, "Because comfort is the thief that enters silently." The student frowned. "But without comfort, life is suffering." Diogenes smiled. "Without comfort, life is alive." He lifted his hand, letting a small beetle crawl across his palm. "See this creature. It carries no possessions, builds no temples, fears no loss, yet it moves with purpose. Tell me, which of us lives more wisely?" He was not against pleasure. He was against dependence. He believed that joy must come freely, or it ceases to be joy. When asked what happiness meant, he said, "To want nothing and still laugh." And he laughed often, not the laughter of mockery, but the deep, silent laughter of someone who has outwitted life itself. The story of the broken bowl spread quickly. Soon, everyone in Athens had heard it. Some mocked him, saying, "The dog philosopher has lost even his dish." Others whispered, "He is mad, but perhaps he is right." Even Plato, when told of it, sighed and said, "If this be madness, may reason never cure it." For Diogenes, the incident with the boy became more than a memory. It became a symbol of everything he had been chasing. The final proof that simplicity was not poverty, but mastery. He said, "The poor man is not he who owns little, but he who needs much." One afternoon, a nobleman came to test him. He found Diogenes sitting by the fountain, eating lentils from a small clay pot. The nobleman said, "If you would flatter kings, you would not have to eat lentils." Diogenes smiled. "And if you learned to eat lentils, you would not have to flatter kings?" The man left speechless, and Diogenes returned to his meal, each bite tasting like victory. Sometimes he wondered what became of the boy, whether he grew into a man, whether he remembered the ragged philosopher who thanked him for teaching simplicity. But Diogenes knew it didn't matter. The lesson was eternal, that wisdom often hides in innocence, and truth speaks softly through the unknowing. He told his few listeners, "When a child teaches a philosopher, the gods are laughing." And he laughed too, loud enough to make the gods jealous. As he aged, his possession vanished one by one, not stolen, but surrendered. The bowl, the sandals, the cloak, each left behind like shed skin. He became almost weightless, as if his soul were slowly escaping gravity. The city saw only a beggar growing older, but inside that weathered body, there lived a man freer than kings. One day, a traveler from Persia stopped him on the road and asked, "Wise man, what is the shortest path to happiness?" Diogenes answered, "Walk barefoot and let go of what you're carrying." The traveler looked at his heavy bags and rich robes. He smiled politely, thinking it a riddle, and walked on. Diogenes shook his head. "The long road is always paved with luggage," he said to himself. In the evenings, he would sit by the fountain again, dipping his hands into the cool water. Sometimes he drank, sometimes he didn't. He no longer needed the act to mean anything. He whispered, "To be human is to forget how simple it was meant to be." He would watch the reflection of the city lights ripple on the water, temples, statues, torches, and think of the boy's hands catching sunlight like liquid gold. That image stayed with him for years, pure, effortless, eternal. And perhaps that was why, near the end of his life, he said, "I have learned everything from the things I no longer use." The boy had been his teacher, the broken bowl his graduation. Narrator voice softens, gentle as dusk. They laughed at him for throwing away what little he had. But he had discovered something the world still struggles to see, that freedom is not gained by adding, but by subtracting. And in the reflection of a child's hands, Diogenes saw the shape of wisdom itself. By now, Athens had learned to live with its mad philosopher. He was as much a part of the city as the pigeons, the beggars, or the dust that settled on marble statues. But tolerance in time became annoyance. Annoyance became disgust, and disgust inevitably became hatred. They called him many names: the beggar of the gods, the lunatic of the agora, the barking dog of Athens. He laughed at them all. But laughter, like a blade, cuts both ways, and even the man who claimed to need nothing still felt the sting of isolation. There were days when the market would fall silent as he passed. Merchants turned their faces, women clutched their shawls, children mocked from a distance. "Hide your bread," they cried. "The dog is hungry." Diogenes would pause, stretch lazily, and reply, "Then guard your lies too, for I hunger for those more than bread." He became a spectacle, the living entertainment of a city that prided itself on intellect, yet loved cruelty. Boys followed him, barking, throwing stones. He barked back, loudly, fearlessly, until they ran laughing into the alleys. He found humor even in their scorn. "Better they bark at me," he once said, "than sleep like their fathers." But beneath that humor was solitude. He slept by his barrel as usual, surrounded by dogs and silence. At night, when Athens glittered with torches and laughter, he listened to the echo of music drifting from the rich quarters. It was beautiful, but hollow, like the sound of a golden cup when struck empty. He whispered to himself, "They feast on illusion and call it celebration." Sometimes he wandered out to the hills beyond the city, away from the noise, where the wind carried only the hum of cicadas. There he spoke to no one, or to everything. He said, "The city calls me mad because I speak truth. If truth is madness, then let me bark until the world goes deaf." He would sit for hours watching the city below, its temples shining, its markets bustling, a hive of pride and fear. "They build statues to wisdom," he murmured, "but crucify the wise." One day, as he entered the agora, a crowd had gathered around a young orator. The man was handsome, confident, dripping with rhetoric. He spoke of justice, patriotism, and glory, words that sparkled like the coins they earned. When the applause died down, Diogenes walked through the crowd, stood before the stage, and said, "I have seen better lies sold for less." The orator flushed. "Old man, you insult the city itself." "No," said Diogenes calmly. "The city insulted itself long before I arrived." The crowd hissed. Someone threw a piece of bread that struck his chest. He picked it up, brushed off the dust, and took a bite. "Thank you," he said. "The only honest gift I've received all day." His contempt became his language. He mocked their rituals, their festivals, their politics. When a priest accused him of impiety, Diogenes bowed low and said, "Forgive me. I forgot that the gods require noise to exist." He was dragged out of the temple, beaten with rods. Blood ran down his back. He laughed through it, spitting red onto the marble. "Strike harder," he said, "so I may remember you tried." The guard stopped. There was no victory in punishing a man who refused to feel shame. Even the philosophers began to distance themselves. They called him uncivilized, unrefined, a mockery of reason. Plato once referred to him as Socrates gone mad. Diogenes responded, "And Plato is reason gone to sleep." He walked into Plato's academy once, dragging a plucked chicken. When the students gasped, he shouted, "Behold, Plato's definition of man, a featherless biped." The laughter shook the walls. Plato banned him forever after. Diogenes bowed on his way out. "Ban me from your walls," he said, "but not from truth." His exile within the city deepened. He had nowhere to belong. Not among the rich, not among the learned, not even among the poor, who feared his scorn more than their hunger. And yet, Diogenes never pitied himself. He pitied them. "The world," he said, "is full of men chasing approval. I chase none, therefore they fear me." He began to see contempt as a form of respect. "Only those who feel threatened hate," he told a listener. "Their hatred is their confession. One morning, as he washed his feet at the fountain, a wealthy citizen sneered, "Dirty dog, you pollute the city's water with your stench." Diogenes looked up. "Then I am honored, for the city's words have long polluted its air." The man struck him. Diogenes didn't flinch. He simply said, "Ah, you hurt your hand to teach me your manners. How generous." The bystanders laughed nervously, torn between shame and amusement. And yet, even as Athens rejected him, its heart could not ignore him. There was something magnetic about a man who feared nothing. He was hated, yes, but also secretly admired. His freedom burned too brightly for the enslaved not to notice. They cursed him by day and quoted him by night. He had become both their mirror and their conscience, a living paradox they could neither destroy nor forget. But there were nights when even he grew weary. Lying in his barrel, he whispered to the stars, "Perhaps I have barked too long into deaf ears." A stray dog nudged his hand. He smiled, stroking its fur. "No," he said softly, "as long as one creature listens, I am not alone." The dog rested its head on his lap. For a moment, silence. Perfect. Whole, unjudging. He closed his eyes and breathed. "Let them scorn," he whispered. "They call me dog. I call them asleep." Once, a curious youth asked him, "Master, do their insults not hurt you?" Diogenes looked at him. "Only the praise of fools wounds me," he said. "Their insults are honest." He added, "When they curse me, they reveal their own chains. When they mock me, they remind me that I am free." He believed that to live truly, one must be willing to be despised. "Truth," he said, "is not loved. It is endured." And he endured it better than anyone. He walked through the city like a ghost wrapped in sunlight, mocked by thousands, moved by none. His very indifference became divine. In the end, the scorn of Athens became his shield. No one could harm a man who no longer needed to belong. He had transcended the currency of approval, a currency even kings depended on. He said, "Their hate is proof that I live correctly, for if the corrupt love you, you are already lost." They spat at him, beat him, mocked him, but his laughter outlasted their stones, for Diogenes knew that ridicule is only the applause of the ignorant. And in the scorn of society, he found the solitude of truth. Even the loudest laughter fades, even the sharpest mind grows quiet, and even the freest soul, one day, must sit in the long shadow of his own solitude. Diogenes was old now, his beard white as sea foam, his skin thin as parchment. The lines on his face were not wrinkles, but maps, each marking a battle fought against the illusions of men. The city had changed around him. New faces, new merchants, new speeches, but the same noise, the same hunger. Athens had grown richer and somehow poorer. He watched it all from the mouth of his barrel, as one might watch a river that never learns where it's going. He no longer shouted at the crowds. He no longer mocked the philosophers or barked at priests. The fire had not died. It had simply burned inward. His rebellion had turned to reflection. Some said age had softened him, but those who saw his eyes knew otherwise. They had not dimmed. They had deepened. At dusk, he would walk alone to the outskirts of the city, where olive trees swayed like old companions. He sat among them, watching the light fade from gold to gray. The silence there was different, not absence, but fullness. It pressed gently against him, like the weight of memory. He whispered to the wind, "I spoke all my life, but the world never answered. Perhaps it was not meant to." He smiled. Perhaps the silence was the answer. Once, a stranger approached him, a traveler from the islands. "Are you the famous Diogenes?" he asked. The old man nodded faintly. I have walked far to hear your wisdom, said the traveler. Diogenes looked at him kindly. Then you have already learned it, he said. To walk far for truth is the truth itself. The traveler bowed, unsure whether he was being taught or teased. Diogenes closed his eyes. I have nothing left to teach, he murmured. The lesson is the life I wasted explaining it. The dogs that once followed him were fewer now. Some had died. Others wandered to warmer places. He missed their company more than he ever missed people. They were honest, he said softly. They never lied to please me, nor left when I was dull. At night, when the city slept, he sometimes dreamed of them, a pack of loyal shapes running freely across fields of endless light, barking joyfully at the stars. He would wake with tears in his eyes, though he would never admit it. His barrel had become frail, cracked by years of sun and rain. One corner had broken off, letting in slivers of starlight. He didn't fix it. Let the sky visit, he said. I am done with roofs. He slept less, ate little, spoke rarely. There was no longer anyone to argue with, and perhaps finally, no need. Sometimes young philosophers visited him, seeking the legendary Cynic. They expected fury, wit, defiance. Instead, they found quiet. One asked, Master, have you lost your faith in mankind? Diogenes smiled sadly. I never had faith in mankind, he said, only curiosity. Another asked, Do you still believe in virtue? He replied, I believe in air. It's everywhere, but invisible. People talk of it, breathe it, and pollute it all the same. He often walked to the harbor to watch ships depart. The sails swelled like the chests of proud men. He admired their confidence, their ignorance. One sailor, recognizing him, shouted, Old philosopher, do you still think you know everything? Diogenes raised a hand to his brow, shading his eyes. No, he said. Now I know nothing, and it's a great relief. The sailors laughed, but one of them fell quiet. He would remember that line for the rest of his life. In the evenings, he sat beside a dying fire and spoke to no one. The silence felt different now. Not an enemy, but an echo. He had shouted so long that even the void seemed to remember his voice. He whispered, I thought freedom would be the end of suffering. But freedom is only the beginning of truth. And truth is heavy when there is no one left to share it. He smiled into the embers. Perhaps that is why men cling to lies. They are lighter to carry. There were moments when memories of his youth returned. The sea at Sinope, the laughter of his father before exile, the face of a teacher named Antisthenes under the olive trees. Each image came like a ghost, soft and fleeting. He no longer fought them. He welcomed them. He even spoke to them. To my father, he said once, looking at the stars, you were punished for corrupting silver. I spent my life corrupting pride. We are both counterfeiters, you and I. He laughed quietly at his own joke, and for a moment, the night felt alive again. One night, a young boy, perhaps a descendant of that first child by the fountain, found him sitting alone. Master, he asked timidly, do you ever feel lonely? Diogenes looked at him. The question was simple, yet it pierced deeper than any debate he'd ever had. He thought for a long while before answering. Lonely? He repeated. No, not exactly. I am simply surrounded by people who have never met themselves. The boy tilted his head. I don't understand. You will, said Diogenes softly. When you grow tired of pretending? As the boy walked away, the philosopher watched him go. A small figure swallowed by the torchlight of the city. He whispered, another seed perhaps? And though his voice trembled, there was warmth in it, the faint glow of hope that even he could not extinguish. Days passed, weeks, perhaps months. The people of Athens stopped noticing when he wasn't there. The market still shouted, the temples still glittered, the city still breathed. But for those who had listened once, even once, the silence where his laughter used to be felt larger than the agora itself. He lay one evening beside his barrel, watching the stars tremble like candlelight above the rooftops. A cold wind passed through the cracks, touching his face like a farewell. He whispered, almost smiling, "I barked at men for half a lifetime. Now I think the gods were the ones laughing." He closed his eyes. Some say he died that night. Others say he simply fell asleep and never woke. But those who knew him, truly knew him, believed something else. They said Diogenes did not die. He simply walked out of his barrel and kept walking until he vanished into the horizon, chasing the sunlight he had once asked kings to step aside from. He had conquered fear, desire, and pride, but even he could not conquer solitude. And yet, in that final silence, the man who needed nothing finally found everything. There are many stories about how he died. Each one says more about the living than about him. Some say he starved himself to death, a final act of defiance against the tyranny of the body. Others whisper that he was bitten by a dog and smiled, saying, "A fitting end for one of my kind." And some, perhaps the wisest of all, say that one morning, Diogenes simply did not wake. The barrel was empty, the sun still rising, and the city strangely quiet. No one knows the truth. But all agree on this. When he died, Athens lost its last honest mirror. The merchants shouted, the philosophers debated, the temples sang. But somewhere, deep in the market, a silence had settled that no one could explain. Even the dogs seemed to wander differently that day, as if searching for a voice they could no longer hear. The boy who had once asked him about loneliness was the first to find him. The old man was sitting upright, his back against the barrel, his hands folded in his lap as though resting. His face turned gently toward the morning sun. His eyes were half open, as if he was still listening to the light. The boy called his name, softly at first, then louder. But Diogenes did not answer. He had already stepped beyond answering. The city gathered. Even those who once mocked him came. The merchants, the orators, the priests, the students, and the dogs that had slept beside him all those years. They stood in silence, unsure what to do with the body of a man who had rejected every custom they knew. No one dared to touch him. No one dared to claim him. Should we give him a proper burial? Someone asked. But another replied, he said he wanted none. And they remembered his words. When asked once what should be done with his body after death, Diogenes had said, "Throw me outside the city for the dogs to eat." The man who had asked him recoiled in horror. "But they will devour you." Diogenes laughed. "Then tell them to be kind. I owe them that much for teaching me truth." They pressed him again. "Surely you want at least a tomb?" "A tomb?" he said. "For what? I will not be there." He smiled. "When I am gone, Athens will still stink the same." And yet, when the day came, they could not bring themselves to follow his command. Even those who hated him could not throw him to the dogs. They wrapped him in a thin cloth, carried him to the edge of the city, and laid him beneath an olive tree. There was no priest, no offering, no prayer. Only the whisper of wind through leaves and the sound of distant waves. A single dog followed, refusing to leave. It sat beside the mound of earth until nightfall, then lay down and slept there, as if keeping watch. The people of Athens, restless with guilt, built a small statue later, not of a man, but of a dog. It stood near the agora, its eyes carved in stone, patient, honest, unblinking. Below it, they inscribed words that time has mostly erased. But fragments remain. Here lies Diogenes, the Dog of Athens, who taught men to be free. His students, few and scattered, continued his spirit. Zeno of Citium, inspired by Diogenes' defiance, would go on to found Stoicism, a philosophy that dressed cynicism in calmer robes, but carried the same heart: freedom through self-mastery, peace through detachment, truth through simplicity. Thus, Diogenes' fire became a torch, passed from hand to hand across centuries. They say that Alexander, when told of his death far away in Babylon, fell silent for a long time. He whispered, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes. Now that Diogenes is dead, perhaps I never truly lived." He died not long after. Two men, one who owned the world and one who owned nothing, gone within the same year. History remembered both, but only one left no empire to crumble. Years turned into generations. Athens forgot the sound of his laughter, but the echo remained. In the cynics, the monks, the poets, and every soul who ever looked at the world and said, "This is madness, and I will not play along." He became legend, and like all legends, he grew larger than life. A myth of the man who slept in a barrel and dared to mock the gods. But the truth was quieter. He was just a man who refused to be owned, who looked at sunlight and found it enough. If one walks the ruins of the old agora today, beneath the broken columns and scattered stones, there's a patch of ground where nothing grows. The locals call it the Dog's Corner. At dusk, when the light hits the marble just right, it glows faintly, as if remembering the man who once defied the sun itself. And maybe, somewhere beyond names and centuries, Diogenes still walks, barefoot, laughing, free. No gods, no kings, no barrel, no chains, only the horizon and the endless warmth of a sun that no one can take away. He owned nothing, desired nothing, feared nothing. He lived as he died, outside every wall, beyond every rule. And though time has buried his bones, the spirit of Diogenes still wanders the world, wherever a free soul dares to need nothing. The barrel was gone. The man was gone. But his echo, sharp, raw, and defiant, refused to fade. In the decades after his death, Athens forgot the face of Diogenes, but not the rumor of his courage. The old stories spread from port to port, carried by sailors, scholars, and wanderers, tales of a man who feared no king, who laughed at gold, and who dared to live naked before the gods. And from those stories, a new seed began to sprout, a philosophy born not in temples, but in the dust. His name was Zeno of Citium. A shipwreck had ruined him, stripped him of all wealth. He arrived in Athens with nothing, a man who had lost everything but the chance to begin again. One day, he stumbled into a bookseller's stall and began reading aloud from a scroll. It was about Socrates. He asked the bookseller where he could find such a man, and the bookseller pointed toward the agora, where a ragged philosopher named Crates, a student of Diogenes, was walking barefoot mocking the world. Zeno followed him, and from that meeting, Stoicism was born. Crates taught him the same lessons Diogenes had once shouted to the wind, that wealth enslaves, that reputation is vanity, that freedom lies in mastery of the self, not in control of others. But Zeno, calmer by nature, turned bark into breath and laughter into silence. He dressed Diogenes' wildness in discipline, and thus, cynicism became Stoicism. He said, "The wise man lives according to nature, not against it, not beneath it." It was the same song Diogenes had howled all his life, but now sung in a softer key. Over the next centuries, that quiet strength spread through the Greek and Roman worlds. From the barrel came an empire of thought. Seneca would write, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." He never met Diogenes, but his words could have been the old dog's own growl. Epictetus, once a slave, would teach, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That was Diogenes, reborn in the voice of bondage, proving that freedom is a state of mind, not of circumstance. And centuries later, in the marble halls of Rome, an emperor named Marcus Aurelius would sit beneath the same stars that once shone on Athens and whisper to himself, "Man seeks retreat in mountains and by the sea, but the greatest retreat is within one's own soul." Diogenes would have smiled. He had built his empire after all, not of stone, but of solitude. The Cynic and the Stoic were brothers separated by temperament. One roared at the world, the other meditated in silence. But their truth was the same, that peace begins when wanting ends. Diogenes had taught by shock, Marcus taught by reason. Yet both pointed toward the same horizon, a life stripped bare of illusion, where a man needs nothing to be whole. Through the centuries, the echo of cynicism never truly died. It changed its form, sometimes as laughter in a poet, sometimes as solitude in a monk, sometimes as rebellion in a thinker who refuses to kneel. When medieval hermits fled to the desert, they were chasing what Diogenes had already found. When saints renounced gold and kings, they followed his path without knowing his name. Even the cynics of modern times, the skeptics, the iconoclasts, those who dare to question everything sacred, still walk in his shadow. He had shown that philosophy need not live in marble halls. It could live barefoot, half-starved, under an open sky. They called him the dog, but his bark became the heartbeat of freedom. It taught the world that morality without honesty is hypocrisy, that wealth without simplicity is burden, and that truth without courage is noise. He left no scripture, no disciples, no temple, only the example of a man who needed nothing but sunlight. And yet, that example changed everything. One Roman historian wrote, "The philosophers speak of the gods. Diogenes spoke to them." He meant that Diogenes' life was prayer, a continuous act of worship through defiance. His poverty was not lack, but reverence for what cannot be bought. He once said, "If I could give the world one gift, it would be hunger, for only the hungry know what it means to be full." That hunger still burns in those who dare to live truthfully. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, he often spoke of the cynic's soul, the man who needs no applause, no comfort, no reward. He admired that purity, even as he ruled an empire. He wrote, "Be like the rock that waves crash over. It stands firm, and the fury of the sea falls still around it." But before the rock, there had been the dog, the first to stand unmoved before the tide of human vanity. In time, cynicism became a word of scorn again, a label for those who mock hope, who sneer at virtue. But that was never Diogenes. His cynicism was not bitterness, but clarity. He did not reject goodness, he stripped it of disguise. He did not despise humanity, he demanded it be honest. True cynicism, he would say, is love uncorrupted by illusion. It is the bark that wakes the sleeper before the fire consumes the house. Centuries later, a writer would describe him like this: "He tore off the masks of men not to shame them, but to free them. And in that tearing, he left behind a template for every soul who ever refused to wear a mask again." The echo of his life continues wherever someone chooses simplicity over wealth, truth over comfort, freedom over applause. In every age, there is someone, a monk, a rebel, a philosopher, a poet sitting alone in a crowded cafe, who hears his laughter across time. And in that laughter, they recognize something eternal. The body of Diogenes turned to dust long ago, but the echo of his defiance became the pulse of philosophy itself. From a barrel in Athens came a light that reached emperors. And though centuries have passed, that light still burns in every heart that dares to live unowned. The sun rose over Athens like it always had, quietly, indifferently, pouring gold over ruins and rooftops, over temples, over the market, over the place where a barrel once stood. But there was no laughter now, no barking, no teasing voice echoing across the square. Only the wind, carrying a faint warmth, as if the sun itself remembered the man who once refused to move aside for it. Time, as always, continued its work. The city changed, the people forgot. But the idea, that stubborn, untamable idea, endured. That a man could own nothing, serve no one, and still live in peace. That a man could face kings and hunger alike with the same calm gaze. That the greatest rebellion is not against rulers or gods, but against the tyranny of wanting. Diogenes had never written a book. He left no philosophy etched in stone, no disciple sworn to repeat his words. And yet, his silence became scripture. His life, a living page written in dust and sunlight. For every century that followed, his story resurfaced wherever men felt trapped by their own desires. In the monasteries, the deserts, the revolutions, there was always someone who whispered his name, even if they did not know it was his. He had shown that wisdom did not belong to the rich, or to the educated, or to the holy. It belonged to those who could look at the world and say, without anger, without fear, I do not need it. To most, that sounded like madness. To Diogenes, it was salvation. He had spent a lifetime tearing away every illusion, fame, wealth, religion, approval, even love, until nothing remained between himself and truth. And when all illusions were gone, what remained was peace. They called him a philosopher, but he was never a man of theories. He was a mirror, one that forced the world to see itself without its costumes. He mocked men not because he hated them, but because he wanted them awake. Sleep is the first luxury of the rich, he once said, and illusion is the second. His rebellion was not rage. It was laughter. The laughter of someone who has already forgiven the world for its foolishness. He laughed at kings because they were trapped in gold. He laughed at priests because they feared their gods. He laughed at philosophers because they hid behind words. And he laughed at himself because even he was still human enough to care. That laughter was his weapon, his prayer, and his crown. And it outlived them all. If freedom had a face, it would not wear a crown or a halo. It would be sunburned, wrinkled, and smiling faintly, like a man sitting in a broken barrel, warming himself in the morning light. That was Diogenes, the rebel who conquered by surrendering, who ruled by refusing to rule, who owned the world because he stopped asking for it. Centuries later, poets would call him saint and madman. Philosophers would call him cynic and sage. But none of those titles mattered, because titles, too, are a kind of chain. If Diogenes could speak now, he would probably laugh and say, "Stop naming me. The moment you name a thing, you trap it." Perhaps that is why he chose to die nameless, buried under the olive tree with no epitaph, but silence. What he left behind was not a school of thought, but a way of seeing. To look at the world not as a marketplace of needs, but as a field of enoughness. He had proven that poverty could be luxury, that solitude could be companionship, and that to need nothing was the purest form of power. In the centuries that followed, many claimed to follow him, but few understood what that meant. To be a true follower of Diogenes was not to live in filth or hunger, but to live without pretending. He did not despise comfort. He despised dependence. He did not hate men. He hated the lies they told themselves to sleep at night. Better a dog who bites, he said, than a man who begs. When he was alive, they feared his tongue. When he was gone, they feared his memory. Because even in death, he remained untamed. No king could claim him. No god could sanctify him. No historian could simplify him. He belonged only to the wind, and the wind does not serve anyone. If you stand where his barrel once stood, at dawn, when the light first touches the stones, and listen, really listen, you might still hear it. A faint bark, a quiet laugh, and a whisper carried on the wind. Be free, need nothing, fear no one. That is his gospel, not written in ink, but in sunlight and breath. Every man who dares to step outside the prison of wanting is his disciple. Every woman who dares to speak truth without fear is his heir. And every child who laughs at pretense is his reincarnation. The rebel philosopher is long gone, but his rebellion never ends. Because every age builds its own cages, and every age needs someone mad enough to break them. Somewhere, perhaps, there is another Diogenes, not in a barrel this time, but in a crowded city, looking around at glowing screens and empty hearts, and whispering, "Still crazy after all these years." He would grin, hold up his invisible lantern, and keep walking. They said he was poor, but he owned the only thing that mattered, himself. They said he was mad, but his madness was clarity. They said he lived like a dog, but he died like a king. Pause. And maybe that is the truest wisdom of all, to want nothing, and yet to live as though the whole world were already yours.